The most dangerous way to lose yourself is not in one dramatic moment, but in the quiet habit of choosing others over your own truth. Think about it honestly. How many times have you stayed silent when something didn't feel right? How many times have you given more, waited longer, adjusted yourself, just to keep someone from leaving? Most people don't call this begging. They call it love. But your body knows the difference. The tension, the overthinking, the constant need for reassurance. This is not love. It's your sense of worth being placed in someone else's hands. And here is the truth. You were never just asking for love. You were asking to feel enough. This audiobook is not here to judge you for that. It's here to wake you up. Because loving yourself more than anyone else is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming grounded. It's about no longer trading your dignity for attention, no longer shrinking to be accepted, no longer chasing what doesn't choose you. When you return to yourself, your energy changes. Your presence changes. Your life changes. You stop begging, and you start choosing. Before we dive in, take a second to hit that like button and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. You might be surprised to find someone listening from the same place as you. Chapter 1. Why begging for love destroys your power. Begging for love rarely looks the way people imagine it. It is not always loud, emotional, or obvious. Most of the time, it is quiet, subtle, almost invisible. It hides behind politeness. It disguises itself as patience. It appears as understanding, flexibility, and emotional availability. And because it looks so socially acceptable, most people never question it. It looks like replying immediately, even when you are mentally exhausted. It looks like saying, "It's okay," when something inside you clearly knows it is not. It looks like waiting for someone to decide your worth while pretending you are simply giving them space. It looks like adjusting your tone, your needs, your expectations, just enough so the other person will not leave. Each of these moments seems small on its own, but repeated over time, they begin to create a pattern. And that pattern slowly erodes something essential inside you. That something is your power. Now understand this clearly. Power is not control over others. Power is not dominance, manipulation, or force. Real power is self-possession. It is the quiet certainty that your value does not need to be negotiated. It is the ability to remain rooted in yourself, regardless of how someone else behaves. The moment you begin to beg for love, even subtly, you shift that power away from yourself. You place the center of your emotional world outside of you. Your mood begins to depend on responses. Your confidence begins to fluctuate with attention. Your sense of worth becomes tied to whether someone chooses you or not. This is not connection. This is surrender. And the most dangerous part is that your nervous system begins to learn from it. It begins to encode a belief so quietly that you may never notice it forming. My value depends on being chosen. Once that belief takes root, everything becomes unstable. You start negotiating your needs. You silence your boundaries before they are even expressed. You filter your truth so it will be more acceptable. You become strategic instead of authentic, careful instead of grounded, available instead of aligned. From the outside, it may look like you are being kind, patient, or loving. But internally, something very different is happening. You are abandoning your own center in exchange for temporary closeness. And here is the truth most people avoid. When you beg for love, you are not asking someone to love you. You are asking them to hold power over you. Because the moment your emotional stability depends on someone else's behavior, they are no longer just part of your life. They become the source of your internal state. Your peace is no longer yours. It becomes conditional. This is why begging never creates what you actually want. It may keep someone around for a while. It may create moments of closeness. It may even feel like progress. But it will never create respect. And without respect, love cannot sustain itself. Respect emerges when someone senses that you can stand without them, that your presence is a choice, not a need, that you are not there because you are afraid to be alone, but because you are aligned with the connection. Humans are deeply intuitive in this way. They may not consciously analyze it, but they feel it. They feel when someone is grounded, and they feel when someone is reaching. And when you are reaching, something shifts. The more you chase, the more the dynamic becomes imbalanced. Not because people are intentionally pulling away, but because desperation carries a certain instability. And human beings are naturally drawn toward what feels stable, not what feels uncertain or dependent. Think about it honestly. Have you ever deeply respected someone who constantly adjusted themselves to please you? Or did you feel, on some level, less engaged, less curious, less drawn in? Not because they were not good enough, but because their energy did not hold its own weight. Begging shrinks you, and people do not connect deeply with what feels diminished. But the loss does not stop at the relationship. The deeper cost is internal. Every time you override your own discomfort to maintain connection, you weaken your trust in yourself. You begin to ignore your intuition. You silence the quiet voice that says, "This doesn't feel right." Over time, that voice becomes harder to hear. You start normalizing what once felt unacceptable. You call inconsistency complexity. You call emotional distance independence. You call confusion mystery. You reinterpret reality just to avoid facing one fear: being alone. But loneliness is not what breaks people. Self-betrayal is. Every time you stay where you are not valued, you reinforce a belief that your needs are optional. Every time you chase someone who is indifferent, you deepen the idea that love must be earned through effort, endurance, and sacrifice. That belief is the root of powerlessness. Because when love becomes something you have to earn, you will always feel behind, always trying to catch up, always trying to prove something that was never meant to be proven. Real power begins with a simple realization. Love that requires you to beg is not love. It is attachment mixed with fear. Real love does not require you to convince, persuade, or perform. It does not demand that you shrink, adjust, or overextend yourself to maintain it. It meets you where you are. It allows you to exist without negotiation. And this is why the first step toward loving yourself more than anyone else is not confidence. It is withdrawal. Not withdrawal from people, but withdrawal from the behaviors that drain your dignity. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing clarity from someone who gives confusion. You stop investing energy where there is no reciprocity. At first, this will feel uncomfortable. Your body has been conditioned to reach outward for reassurance. Your mind will create fear. It will ask, what if they leave? Let them. Not because you do not care, but because anything that requires you to abandon yourself to survive is already misaligned. When you stop begging, something begins to shift. Your nervous system, once constantly activated, starts to calm. Your attention, once scattered, begins to return. Your energy, once leaking outward, starts to gather inward. And that is where your power returns. Not as arrogance, not as coldness, but as presence. You become someone who can stay without fear. someone who can leave without anger, someone who no longer needs to be chosen to feel whole. And here is the paradox. The less you beg for love, the more capable you become of experiencing real love. Because love given from wholeness is free. It is not anxious. It does not cling. It does not demand constant proof. It does not disappear when space appears. It simply exists. And from that place, everything begins to change. Chapter 2. The childhood wound behind your need for validation. If you have ever wondered why you crave reassurance, even when you logically understand that you should not need it, the answer does not begin in your current relationships. It begins much earlier, in a time when you did not have language, logic, or control, only experience. As a child, you did not choose your environment. You adapted to it. And adaptation, when repeated over years, becomes identity. If love around you was consistent, warm, and stable, your nervous system learned that connection is safe. But if love was unpredictable, conditional, or tied to behavior, something else formed beneath the surface. You began to associate love not with safety, but with effort. If affection appeared only when you were quiet, helpful, or impressive, you learned to perform. If attention came and went without explanation, you learned to stay alert. If emotional closeness was inconsistent, you learned to read subtle cues, to anticipate shifts, to adjust before something went wrong. None of this was conscious. Children do not analyze, they absorb. And what you absorbed was not just behavior, it was a pattern that quietly shaped your nervous system and your sense of self, a pattern that said, love is something I must secure. So, you became attentive, sensitive, aware of tone, pauses, energy. You learned to read between words. You learned to predict emotional weather. You learned to adjust yourself to maintain connection. This was not weakness. It was intelligence. It was survival. But survival patterns do not disappear just because you grow older. They evolve. They follow you into adulthood and reappear in your relationships, not as memories, but as reactions. This is where the need for validation is born. Validation feels powerful because it touches something very old inside you. It feels like relief, like oxygen, like a signal that everything is okay again. When someone responds warmly, your body relaxes. When someone pulls away, your body tightens. This is not random emotional fluctuation. It is your nervous system responding to a familiar pattern it learned long ago. But here is where most people misunderstand what is happening. They believe they are craving love. What they are actually craving is relief. Relief from the tension of uncertainty. Relief from the fear of disconnection. Relief from the old imprint that says love can disappear at any moment. And because validation provides that relief, even temporarily, you begin to depend on it. But relief is not the same as healing. This is why reassurance never fully satisfies you. You can receive affection, kind words, attention, and still feel empty minutes later. You can be told that you matter and still feel the urge to check, to confirm, to make sure it is still true. Because the original wound was never resolved. It was only soothed. And soothing, when it comes from outside, is always temporary. This creates a cycle. You feel anxious. You seek reassurance. You feel better. Then silence returns, and the anxiety rises again. And each time you repeat this cycle, your dependence deepens. Not because you are weak, but because your system has learned that external validation is the fastest way to regulate internal discomfort. Over time, something subtle but significant happens. You begin to outsource your sense of worth. Your self-esteem rises and falls based on attention. Your emotional state becomes tied to responses you cannot control. Your inner stability becomes dependent on external behavior. And this is where emotional dependence quietly takes hold. When your sense of self is anchored outside of you, you will begin to tolerate things that do not align with your truth. You will accept inconsistency. You will overlook distance. You will justify behavior that confuses or hurts you. Not because you lack awareness, but because you are trying to maintain access to the thing that regulates you. This is how self-respect begins to erode, not in one moment, but gradually, quietly, through small compromises that feel necessary at the time. You stay longer than you should. You explain more than is needed. You give more than is reciprocated. You become more patient, more understanding, more available, not from abundance, but from fear. Fear of losing the connection that keeps your system stable. But the stability is an illusion, because anything that requires constant external input to maintain your sense of self is not stability. It is dependency, and dependency always comes with a cost. The deeper truth is this: you were never taught how to self-soothe. Self-soothing is the ability to sit with discomfort without abandoning yourself. It is the capacity to regulate your own emotional state without immediately reaching outward for relief. It is the skill of staying present with your feelings instead of escaping them through someone else's attention. Most people were never taught this, so they reach, they text, they explain, they overgive, they try harder. Not because they are needy, but because they are untrained in another way of being. Healing begins the moment you stop judging this pattern and start understanding it. You do not shame a wound. You learn how to care for it. The first step is awareness. Noticing when the urge for validation arises. Noticing the tightening in your chest, the restless thoughts, the impulse to act immediately, to reach, to secure reassurance. And then, instead of reacting, you pause. You create a small space between feeling and action. And in that space, you introduce a new message. This feeling is old. I am safe. This may sound simple, but it is a profound shift. Because each time you choose to stay with yourself, instead of reaching outward, you begin to retrain your nervous system. You teach it something new, something it may have never learned before. My worth does not depend on being chosen. At first, this will feel uncomfortable. Your body may resist. Your mind may question it. That is natural. You are not just changing a habit. You are rewriting a pattern that has existed for years. But slowly, something begins to change. You feel less reactive, less urgent, less dependent on immediate responses. The space between stimulus and reaction grows. And in that space, your sense of self begins to rebuild. Validation no longer feels like oxygen. It becomes a bonus. And from that place, your relationships begin to shift. You stop asking, do they approve of me? You start asking, do I feel safe being myself here? That question changes everything. Because safety, real safety, does not come from someone choosing you. It comes from knowing you will not abandon yourself. And that is the foundation of loving yourself more than anyone else. Not confidence, not perfection, but inner safety. When you give yourself what you once begged others for, the hunger begins to fade. And when the hunger fades, you stop chasing love. You allow it. Chapter 3. Why you become addicted to reassurance. There is a moment most people recognize, but rarely understand. A message arrives, and your body softens. Your thoughts slow down, Your chest loosens. For a brief moment, everything feels okay again. Then, hours later, silence returns. The mind begins to question. The body tightens. The same unease rises again. Nothing external has truly changed. And yet, internally, everything has shifted. This is the cycle of reassurance. And it is not random. It is patterned. Reassurance does not just comfort you. It regulates you. It acts like a temporary stabilizer for a system that has not yet learned how to stabilize itself. And because it works, because it brings relief, you begin to depend on it without realizing the cost. But understand this clearly. Reassurance is not love. It is relief. And relief, by its nature, is temporary. The moment it fades, the original discomfort returns, not because something is wrong, but because nothing was actually resolved. The underlying tension was simply paused. This is how dependency forms. You feel discomfort. You seek reassurance. You feel better. The discomfort returns. You seek again. And each time this loop completes, your system strengthens the association. Relief comes from outside me. Over time, this becomes automatic. Your mind begins scanning constantly, looking for signals, analyzing tone, measuring response time, interpreting silence. You become hyper-aware of subtle shifts, not because you want to overthink, but because your system is trying to protect you from uncertainty. But the protection becomes the problem. Because the more you rely on reassurance, the less capable you become of tolerating its absence. Your emotional baseline lowers. What once felt neutral, now feels uncertain. What once felt uncertain, now feels threatening. What once felt threatening now feels unbearable. And so, you reach faster. You seek more. You need stronger signals to feel the same level of calm. This is not emotional weakness. It is conditioning. There is also a biological layer to this pattern. Each time you receive reassurance, your brain releases chemicals associated with safety and reward. It reinforces the behavior that led to that relief. But over time, the brain adapts. The same level of reassurance produces less effect. So you begin to seek more frequent, more intense confirmation. Not because you are irrational, but because your system has learned to chase the feeling of relief. And this creates a quiet addiction, not to people themselves, but to what they provide, to the temporary quieting of your inner world. But here is where the deeper cost emerges. When reassurance becomes your anchor, you lose your center. Your stability becomes external. Your peace becomes conditional. Your identity begins to shift based on how others respond to you. You are no longer standing in yourself. You are reacting to everything outside of you. This is why reassurance never truly satisfies. Because what you are seeking is not another message, another sign, another confirmation. You are seeking internal stability, and that cannot be built externally. There is also a subtle, emotional distortion that begins to take place. You start confusing attention with care. You start interpreting responsiveness as depth. You start believing that consistency in communication equals consistency in intention. But these are not the same. Someone can give you attention without truly seeing you. Someone can reassure you without truly valuing you. Someone can respond consistently without being aligned with you. When your system is dependent on reassurance, you become less able to discern these differences. Because your focus shifts from truth to relief. You are no longer asking, "Is this real?" You are asking, "Does this make me feel okay right now?" And that question will always lead you back into the cycle. This is why many people remain in connections that are unclear, inconsistent, or misaligned. Not because they do not see the reality, but because the moments of reassurance are strong enough to override it. The relief becomes more powerful than the truth, and slowly your intuition becomes quieter, not because it disappeared, but because it is being ignored. Each time you choose temporary comfort over deeper clarity, you reinforce the pattern. You teach yourself that feeling better now is more important than being aligned long-term. And over time, that trade weakens you, not outwardly, but internally. You begin to lose trust in your own perception. You question your instincts. You look outward for confirmation of what you already feel inside. This is the deeper addiction, not just to reassurance, but to external authority over your own experience. Breaking this pattern does not require you to eliminate your desire for reassurance. It requires you to understand it, to see it clearly for what it is, a learned response to discomfort, and then to introduce something new. Instead of immediately reaching outward when discomfort arises, you pause. You stay. You allow the sensation to exist without trying to remove it instantly. At first, this will feel unnatural. Your body will resist. Your mind will create urgency. It will tell you that something is wrong, that you need to act, that you need to fix it. But if you stay long enough, something unexpected happens. The intensity begins to change, not disappear instantly, but soften. The wave rises, and then it falls. And in that experience, you learn something new. You learn that discomfort is not permanent, that it moves, that it can be experienced without being escaped. This is the beginning of internal stability. Each time you stay instead of reaching, you weaken the old loop. Each time you tolerate uncertainty without immediately seeking reassurance, you strengthen your capacity to remain grounded. And slowly, your system recalibrates. Reassurance no longer feels like a necessity. It becomes optional. And from that place, something shifts in your relationships. You are no longer interacting from urgency. You are no longer trying to extract stability from others. You begin to see more clearly. You notice inconsistency without needing to justify it. You recognize misalignment without needing to fix it. You observe behavior without immediately internalizing it. Your perception sharpens. Your energy stabilizes. Your presence becomes more contained. And here is the deeper transformation. You begin to realize that what you were seeking was never actually in another person. It was in your own capacity to remain with yourself, to feel without collapsing, to experience uncertainty without losing your center, to exist without constant confirmation. This is not emotional distance. This is emotional maturity. And from this place, love becomes different. It is no longer something that regulates you. It is something you experience freely, without dependency, without urgency, without fear. Chapter 4. Love is not attachment, it is choice. Most people believe they understand what love feels like. They describe intensity, obsession, the constant pull toward someone, the inability to stop thinking about them, the emotional highs and lows that make everything feel alive, urgent, meaningful. But what they are often describing is not love. It is attachment. Attachment feels powerful because it activates your entire system. It grips your attention. It sharpens your focus. It creates a sense of importance around the connection. It tells you, this matters. Do not lose this. But beneath that intensity, there is something else. Fear. Fear of losing. Fear of being left. fear of facing yourself without the distraction of another person's presence. Attachment is not just about wanting someone. It is about needing them to regulate something inside you. And that need changes everything. When you are attached, your nervous system is constantly on alert. You monitor tone, timing, and behavior. You interpret silence as distance. You search for signs that everything is still okay. Your emotional state becomes conditional. If they are warm, you feel safe. If they are distant, you feel unstable. This is not intimacy. This is dependency. Attachment does not ask, "Do I want to be here?" It asks, "Can I handle it if they leave?" And that question alone reveals the difference, because love never requires you to disappear. Attachment quietly does. Attachment convinces you that intensity equals depth, that longing equals connection, that emotional fluctuation equals meaning. But intensity is not intimacy, and instability is not proof of love. In fact, the more attached you are, the less choice you actually have. You stay not because the connection aligns with you, but because leaving feels unbearable. You tolerate not because it feels right, but because the alternative feels worse. Your decisions become driven by avoidance, not alignment. Choice disappears when fear takes over, and without choice, there is no real love. Love begins where choice exists. To choose someone means you could walk away, and you decide not to. Not because you are afraid, but because you are aligned. Not because you need them to feel whole, but because being with them adds to your wholeness. Love says, "I want you." Attachment says, "I cannot lose you." That difference may seem small, but it changes the entire structure of the relationship. When you are attached, your world begins to narrow. Your focus shifts toward maintaining the bond. Your energy becomes concentrated on preserving the connection at any cost. Your sense of self becomes secondary. You become hyper-aware of everything that might threaten the relationship. You adjust. You compensate. You overthink. You try to control outcomes indirectly by managing yourself. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to lose yourself. Love does the opposite. Love expands your life. It allows space. It encourages growth. It supports individuality. It does not require you to monitor constantly, to adjust continuously, or to suppress parts of yourself to maintain harmony. In love, you are still you. In attachment, you become someone else. One of the clearest signs that you are attached rather than loving is where your focus is placed. If you are more focused on keeping the connection than honoring yourself, you are attached. If you are tolerating what hurts to avoid losing someone, you are attached. If you are overriding your intuition to maintain closeness, you are attached. And the more you do this, the less real the connection becomes. Because love requires truth. Truth about what you feel. Truth about what you need. Truth about what you will and will not accept. Attachment avoids truth, because truth can threaten the bond. This is why people in attachment often struggle to speak honestly. They fear disrupting the connection. They fear being too much. They fear creating distance, so they stay silent, or they soften their truth, or they delay expressing what matters. But silence comes at a cost. Every unspoken truth creates distance, not between you and the other person, but between you and yourself. Love does not fear truth. It depends on it. Another quiet signal of attachment is urgency. The need to define things quickly. The pressure to secure reassurance. The discomfort with uncertainty. The constant need to know where you stand. Attachment rushes. Love unfolds. Love does not need immediate certainty to feel stable. It allows time. It allows space. It allows things to develop naturally, without forcing clarity prematurely. Attachment, on the other hand, demands resolution. It seeks to eliminate uncertainty as quickly as possible, because uncertainty triggers fear. But in trying to remove uncertainty, attachment often creates instability. Because it is not built on presence, it is built on control. When you begin to love yourself more than anyone else, your perspective changes. You begin to ask different questions. Instead of asking, "How do I make this work?" you ask, "Does this support who I am becoming?" Instead of asking, "How do I keep them interested?" you ask, "Do I feel respected here?" Instead of asking, "What if I lose them?" you ask, "What am I losing by staying?" These questions bring you back to choice, and choice restores your power. Because when you are choosing, you are not reacting. You are not being driven by fear. You are not operating from scarcity. You are acting from alignment. This is why emotionally mature love feels different. It is not chaotic. It is not overwhelming. It is not constantly shifting between extremes. It is stable, grounded, consistent. It does not drain you. It supports you. Attachment drains you. Love restores you. Learning to tell the difference is not about becoming detached or distant. It is about becoming honest. Honest about what you feel. Honest about why you stay. Honest about whether your decisions are driven by fear or by alignment. At first, releasing attachment will feel like loss. Your body will react. Your mind will create stories. It will tell you that you are letting go of something important, something meaningful, something rare. But what you are actually releasing is not love. You are releasing the illusion that someone else completes you. And that illusion is heavy. It keeps you dependent. It keeps you reactive. It keeps you in a constant state of seeking. When it dissolves, something else takes its place. Space, clarity, freedom. You begin to relate without clinging, to care without collapsing, to connect without losing your center. And that is where real love becomes possible. Not as a reaction, not as a survival strategy, but as a conscious, grounded choice. Chapter 5. How self-abandonment becomes your relationship habit. Self-abandonment does not begin as something obvious. It does not arrive as a clear decision to ignore yourself. It does not feel dramatic, extreme, or even wrong in the moment. In fact, most of the time, it feels reasonable. It feels like compromise. It feels like being mature, understanding, and emotionally intelligent. But over time, it becomes something else. It becomes a pattern. And that pattern slowly erodes your connection to yourself. It begins in small moments. The first time you silence a need because you do not want to create tension. The first time you say, "It's fine," when something inside you feels anything but fine. The first time you laugh off something that actually hurt you, just to keep the atmosphere light. Each of these moments seems insignificant, but they are not. Because each time you override your truth, you send a message inward. My experience matters less than keeping this connection. And when that message repeats often enough, it becomes belief. You begin to prioritize harmony over honesty. You begin to value being liked over being respected. You begin to manage yourself instead of expressing yourself. This is where self-abandonment takes root. It is not loud. It is not visible to others. But internally, it changes everything. You start editing yourself before you speak. You adjust your tone. You soften your words. You remove anything that might create discomfort. You rehearse conversations in your mind, trying to find the safest version of what you want to say. And slowly, you begin to live from the outside in. Your decisions become reactions. Your emotions become something to control rather than something to understand. Your intuition becomes something you question instead of something you trust. The most painful part is not that you are doing this. It is that you are doing it to preserve relationships that are quietly draining you. Because when you abandon yourself, you are trying to maintain connection at any cost. And that cost is your inner alignment. There is also an energetic consequence to this pattern. When you consistently suppress your truth, your system does not relax. It becomes hyper-aware. It monitors constantly. It watches for signals that you are still accepted, still valued, still safe. This creates a low-level state of stress in the body. You may not notice it immediately, but it accumulates. It shows up as tension in your shoulders, tightness in your chest, fatigue that does not seem to have a clear cause, a sense of emotional heaviness that lingers even when nothing obvious is wrong. This is not random. This is your body responding to misalignment. Because self-abandonment is not just emotional. It is physiological. You are constantly managing yourself instead of being yourself. And that constant management requires energy. It keeps your system active. It prevents true rest. And over time, this becomes exhausting. But many people misinterpret this exhaustion. They believe relationships are supposed to feel this way. They say, love is hard. They say, connection requires effort. They normalize the feeling of being drained. But love itself is not what is draining you. Self-betrayal is. The more you abandon yourself, the more resentment begins to build. Not always toward the other person, but toward yourself. A quiet frustration that says, why didn't I speak up? Why did I accept that? Why did I stay silent again? This resentment erodes something even deeper. Self-trust. Because every time you override your own truth, you weaken your belief that you will protect yourself. You begin to feel uncertain, not just about others, but about your own ability to make decisions that honor you. And when you do not trust yourself, fear increases. Fear of being alone. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of losing something important. Fear of not finding something better. So you stay. Not because it feels right, but because leaving feels uncertain. And this is how the cycle continues. Breaking this pattern requires a shift that may feel uncomfortable at first. You must decide that your inner world is not negotiable. This does not mean becoming rigid. It does not mean rejecting compromise. It does not mean ignoring others. It means including yourself in the equation. It means recognizing that your feelings, your needs, your limits, and your intuition are not obstacles to connection. They are part of it. At first, expressing this truth will feel difficult. Your body may tense. Your voice may feel unfamiliar. Your mind may create doubt. It may tell you that you are being too much, too sensitive, too demanding. But this discomfort is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are doing something new. Each time you choose to express your truth, even in small ways, you begin to rebuild trust with yourself. You say no when you mean no. You pause instead of explaining everything. You allow moments of silence without rushing to fill them. You acknowledge what you feel without immediately dismissing it. These actions may seem small, but they are powerful because they signal to your system that you are no longer willing to abandon yourself for the sake of comfort, and something begins to change. You feel calmer. Not because everything around you improves immediately, but because you are no longer in conflict with yourself. The internal tension begins to release. You stop monitoring constantly. You stop adjusting excessively. You stop performing for approval. And as this shift happens, your relationships begin to change as well. Some people will respond positively. They will meet you with more respect, more clarity, more balance. Others will resist. They were comfortable with the version of you that stayed silent, that adjusted easily, that prioritized their needs. Let them resist. Because anyone who requires your self-abandonment to maintain connection is not aligned with your growth. This does not mean they are bad. It means the dynamic is no longer sustainable. And when that dynamic dissolves, something new becomes possible. Relationships where you do not have to disappear to stay. Relationships where your presence is enough. Relationships where connection does not require self-erasure. Because love that requires you to abandon yourself is not love. It is control, disguised as connection. And the moment you stop making that trade, everything begins to shift. You return to yourself. And from that place, real connection becomes possible. Chapter 6. The fear of being alone and why it controls you. Most people believe they are afraid of being alone, but if you look more closely, what they actually fear is not solitude itself. It is what solitude reveals. When you are alone, there is no distraction, no constant feedback, no external confirmation, no one to regulate your emotional state in real time. And in that absence, something begins to surface. Thoughts you have been avoiding, feelings you have been suppressing, questions you have been postponing. Silence becomes a mirror, and for many, that mirror feels overwhelming. So they move quickly to fill the space. They reach out to people who drain them. They stay in conversations that feel empty. They hold on to connections that no longer align, not because those connections are fulfilling, but because they prevent them from facing what arises in stillness. But loneliness itself is not the problem. Panic is. Panic is what happens when your system interprets aloneness as danger. When you sit in silence and your chest tightens, when your mind begins to race, when you feel the urge to escape the moment, that is not loneliness harming you. That is conditioning activating. Somewhere along the way, you learned to associate being alone with something negative, with rejection, with abandonment, with not being chosen, with not being enough. So when you are alone, your system does not register it as neutral. It registers it as threat. Your heart rate changes. Your thoughts accelerate. Your body seeks resolution. It wants to fix the feeling quickly, to reach out, to attach, to restore connection. This reaction is not weakness. It is learned. But when you act from that panic, you reinforce it. Each time you escape solitude immediately, you teach your system something very specific. I cannot handle being alone. And that belief becomes powerful. Because when you believe you cannot handle being alone, you will accept almost anything to avoid it. You will tolerate inconsistency. You will accept emotional distance. You will remain in situations that drain you. You will ignore what does not feel right. Not because you do not see it, but because the alternative, being alone, feels worse. This is how fear becomes control. It does not force you directly. It shapes your decisions quietly. It narrows your options. It convinces you that staying is safer than leaving, even when staying is costing you your peace. But here is the truth most people never fully allow themselves to see. Loneliness is not what breaks you. Avoidance is. Because every time you avoid being alone, you delay the moment you meet yourself fully. You postpone the development of inner stability. You reinforce the idea that your sense of self depends on constant connection, and that keeps you dependent. But something changes when you begin to face loneliness directly, not by forcing yourself to enjoy it, but by allowing yourself to experience it without immediately escaping. At first it will feel uncomfortable. The silence will feel loud. The stillness will feel heavy. Your mind will search for something to hold on to. Your body will create urgency. Stay. Not perfectly, not indefinitely, just long enough to notice. Notice the sensations. Notice the thoughts. Notice the discomfort, without labeling it as something that needs to be fixed immediately. And slowly, something begins to shift. The intensity softens. The urgency fades. The panic loses its grip. And what remains is something very different from what you expected. Not emptiness, but space. Space that was previously filled with distraction. Space that now allows you to feel your own presence again. This is where your relationship with yourself begins to rebuild. Because in that space, you begin to notice things you could not see before. You notice your natural rhythm, your thoughts without interference, your emotions without external influence, your preferences, your desires, your internal signals. You begin to reconnect. And this reconnection changes something fundamental. You realize that being alone does not mean being abandoned. It means being with yourself. And when that distinction becomes clear, the fear begins to lose its power. Because you are no longer interpreting solitude as absence. You are experiencing it as presence. Your own presence. And from this place, your decisions begin to change. You no longer stay in situations out of fear. You no longer chase connection out of urgency. You no longer attach to avoid discomfort. You choose from clarity, from alignment, from a place that is not trying to escape something, but to move towards something real. This is where freedom begins. Not when you eliminate loneliness, but when loneliness no longer controls you. Because when you are no longer afraid of being alone, you become unavailable for anything that requires you to betray yourself. You become more selective, more grounded, more aware of what truly aligns with you. And paradoxically, this makes your connections stronger. Because you are no longer using people to escape yourself. You are meeting them from a place of wholeness. And that changes everything. Chapter 7. Learning to sit with loneliness without panic. There is a difference between being alone and being abandoned. Most people never learn that difference. So when they find themselves alone, their body reacts as if something is missing, as if something has gone wrong, as if they have been left behind. The silence feels heavy. The stillness feels uncomfortable. The mind begins searching for something, anything, to fill the space. But loneliness is not the enemy. It is a doorway, and like any doorway, what matters is whether you rush past it or learn to walk through it consciously. When you begin to sit with loneliness, instead of escaping it, you are not just tolerating discomfort. You are training your system to experience itself without external support. You are teaching your mind and body that you can exist, feel, and remain stable without needing constant input from others. At first, this feels unnatural. Your system has been conditioned to reach outward, to fill space quickly, to avoid stillness. So when you choose not to act on that impulse, resistance appears. Thoughts become louder. Emotions become more noticeable. The urge to distract yourself becomes stronger. This is not failure. This is exposure. You are seeing what has always been there, but was previously covered by noise, interaction, and constant stimulation. And the moment you stop running, you begin to build something most people never develop. Emotional endurance. Emotional endurance is not about suppressing what you feel. It is about allowing what you feel without needing to escape it immediately. It is the ability to stay present in discomfort long enough for it to change on its own. because all emotions move. They rise, they peak, and they fall. But if you interrupt that process every time discomfort appears, you never experience its full cycle. You never learn that it can pass without external intervention. So, you remain dependent. Sitting with loneliness teaches you something different. It shows you that the feeling is not permanent. It shows you that the intensity shifts. It shows you that what felt overwhelming at first can become neutral, even peaceful, when given space. This is where your nervous system begins to recalibrate. Instead of associating silence with danger, it begins to associate it with safety. Instead of interpreting stillness as absence, it begins to experience it as stability. And from that shift, something deeper emerges. Clarity. When you are no longer filling every moment with distraction, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. Your thoughts become less reactive. Your emotions become easier to understand. Your internal signals become more accessible. You start to notice what you actually feel, not just what you react to. You start to recognize patterns that were previously hidden. You start to see where you have been reaching outward to avoid turning inward. And this awareness is powerful, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to understand that many of your previous choices were not based on alignment, but on avoidance. Not based on truth, but on the need to escape discomfort. And that realization gives you a new kind of control. Not control over others, but control over yourself. This is where emotional independence begins to take form, not in isolation, but in stability. You are no longer afraid of space. You are no longer threatened by silence. You are no longer driven by the need to fill every gap with connection. You can sit. You can breathe. You can exist without urgency. And that changes how you relate to everything. You stop interpreting distance as rejection. You stop assuming that silence means something is wrong. You stop needing constant reassurance to feel okay. Instead, you begin to enjoy connection rather than depend on it. This is a subtle but powerful shift, because when you enjoy something, you can experience it fully, without needing it to define you. When you depend on something, you cling to it, you monitor it, you fear losing it. And fear changes the quality of your experience. When you no longer fear being alone, your connections become cleaner. You show up without hidden pressure. You communicate without underlying anxiety. You allow space without interpreting it as loss. You become easier to connect with. Not because you are trying harder, but because you are no longer carrying the weight of fear into every interaction. There are also practical ways to build this capacity. Simple actions that retrain your system. Sitting in silence for a few minutes without reaching for your phone. Walking without music or distraction. Eating a meal without external input. Allowing moments of stillness to exist without immediately filling them. These actions may seem insignificant, but they are not. They are signals to your nervous system. They teach your body that solitude is not abandonment, that stillness is not danger, that you can remain present without needing constant stimulation. At first, your mind will resist. It will search for something to do, something to think about, something to distract you. Let it. You do not need to eliminate the thoughts. You only need to stop running from them. Because over time, the mind settles, the body relaxes, the urge to escape decreases, and what once felt uncomfortable begins to feel natural. This is when loneliness transforms. It stops feeling like something you need to avoid. It becomes something you can move through, and eventually, something you can even appreciate. Not because it is pleasant in every moment, but because it reconnects you with yourself. And that connection is the foundation of everything. Because when you are connected to yourself, you are no longer searching for someone else to complete you. You are no longer filling a void. You are simply sharing your presence. And from that place, relationships become different. They are no longer driven by need. They are built on choice. And that is where real connection begins. Chapter 8. The Discipline of Emotional Independence. Emotional independence is often misunderstood. Many people believe it means not needing anyone, not feeling deeply, or becoming distant and unaffected. They imagine it as a kind of emotional detachment, where nothing touches you, and no one has influence over your inner state. But that is not independence. That is avoidance. True emotional independence is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to feel fully without losing control of yourself. It is the ability to experience emotions without handing over authority to them. It is emotional responsibility. And most people were never taught this. They were taught to react. A message arrives late, and anxiety rises. A tone shifts, and the mood changes. A small rejection occurs, and it spirals into self-doubt. These reactions feel automatic, almost unavoidable, because they are patterns stored deep in the nervous system. They were formed long before conscious awareness was available. So, when something happens, your system responds immediately. Not because you choose it, but because it has learned to. Emotional independence begins at the moment you interrupt that automatic reaction. Not by suppressing it, not by denying what you feel, but by pausing. There is a space, very small at first, between what you feel and what you do. And that space is everything. In that space, you become aware. You notice the tightening in your chest, the rush of thoughts, the impulse to act, to explain, to defend, to fix, to reach out and restore stability. Instead of following that impulse immediately, you stay. You observe. You allow the feeling to exist without turning it into action. This is discipline, not control, not force, but presence. Because when you act immediately on every emotion, you give your emotions control over your behavior. When you pause, you allow your emotions to inform you, not control you. This distinction changes everything. When emotions control you, your actions are reactive. You say things you do not fully mean. You apologize for things that do not require apology. You overextend yourself just to restore a sense of calm. You chase resolution, not clarity. You are not choosing. You are responding to discomfort. But when emotions inform you, something different happens. You listen. You feel the anger and recognize that a boundary may have been crossed. You feel the sadness and understand that something meaningful has been lost. You feel the fear and realize that something important to you feels uncertain. The emotion becomes information, not a command, and you decide what to do next. This is emotional independence. It requires you to tolerate discomfort without immediately trying to remove it. Instead of asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" you begin to ask, "What is this feeling showing me?" That shift is subtle, but it changes your relationship with yourself completely. You stop fighting your emotions. You stop fearing them. You stop trying to escape them. And when you stop resisting them, they lose their intensity. Because much of what makes emotions overwhelming is not the emotion itself. It is the resistance to it, the urgency to get rid of it, the belief that it should not be there. When you remove that resistance, the emotion moves more freely. It comes, it peaks, and it passes. And in that process, you remain stable. This stability becomes your foundation. You no longer depend on immediate resolution to feel okay. You no longer need someone else to regulate your state. You no longer interpret discomfort as something that must be fixed right away. You trust yourself to handle it. And that trust changes how you move through relationships. You no longer react instantly during conflict. You slow down. You choose your words. You speak from clarity instead of intensity. You do not need to win every interaction. You do not need to prove your point at all costs. You focus on alignment. Because when you are emotionally independent, your goal is not control. It is truth. Without emotional independence, relationships often become emotional battlegrounds. Each person reacting, defending, escalating, trying to restore their own internal balance through the other person. But with emotional independence, something shifts. You stop using emotions as weapons. You stop demanding that others fix what you feel. You stop collapsing when something feels uncertain. You remain present, and that presence creates stability, not only for you, but for the relationship itself. Because stability is deeply felt. People may not understand it consciously, but they feel when someone is grounded. They feel when someone is not reacting impulsively, not projecting, not escalating unnecessarily. That steadiness creates safety, not the kind of safety that comes from constant reassurance, but the kind that comes from consistency, from knowing that you will not abandon yourself. And when you do not abandon yourself, you do not need to cling to others. At first, this discipline will feel unnatural. Your system will want to move quickly. It will want to discharge energy. It will want to act. Let it want. Discipline is not the absence of impulse. It is the ability to not follow every impulse. Each time you choose to stay instead of react, you strengthen something new. A pathway, a pattern, a different way of being. And over time, this becomes more natural. The pause becomes easier. The reactions become less intense. The stability becomes more consistent. You begin to feel something that was previously unfamiliar. Inner authority. A quiet sense that no matter what happens, you will not lose yourself. You may feel pain, but you will not collapse. You may feel loss, but you will not beg. You may feel anger, but you will not destroy. You remain. And that is power. Not loud, not aggressive, but steady. The kind of power that does not need to prove itself. The kind that simply exists. And from that place, love becomes different. You can care without clinging. You can connect without losing yourself. You can engage without fear. Because your emotional state is no longer controlled by what is happening outside of you. It is anchored within you. And that changes everything. Chapter 9. Stop overgiving to feel worthy. Overgiving is one of the most misunderstood patterns in human behavior. From the outside, it looks admirable. It looks generous, caring, selfless. It appears as kindness, as emotional availability, as someone who is always willing to show up, to help, to understand. But beneath that surface, there is often something else driving it. Not abundance. Fear. Fear of being replaceable. Fear of not being enough. Fear that if you do not give more, try harder, and show up beyond your limits, you will not be chosen. So you give. You give your time when you are already tired. You give your energy when you need rest. You give your understanding when you are hurt. You give second chances before the first wound has even healed. And you do it quietly, without asking for much in return. Because somewhere inside, there is a belief that if you just give enough, eventually it will be enough. Eventually, someone will see you, value you, choose you. But here is the truth. Overgiving is rarely about the other person. It is about proving your worth. It is an unconscious attempt to secure love by becoming indispensable. You anticipate needs before they are expressed. You adjust your behavior to avoid conflict. You make yourself useful, accommodating, easy to be around. And for a while, this seems to work. People appreciate you. They rely on you. They stay. But appreciation is not the same as respect, and reliance is not the same as reciprocity. Over time, something begins to shift. The balance changes. You start to feel unseen, unmet, exhausted. You begin to ask yourself quietly, why do I give so much and receive so little? And the answer is uncomfortable. Because you taught people that access to you does not require effort. When you give without limits, you remove the natural structure that allows others to meet you halfway. You fill every gap before it can be noticed. You offer everything before it is asked for, and in doing so, you leave no space for reciprocity. Connection becomes one-sided, not always intentionally, but inevitably, because balance requires participation from both sides, and overgiving removes that balance. There is also a deeper consequence. When you are constantly focused on giving, you lose connection with yourself. You stop asking what you need. You stop noticing what you feel. You stop honoring your limits. Your attention is directed outward, toward maintaining connection, toward being enough, toward making sure everything is okay. And in that process, you become disconnected from your own experience. This disconnection erodes your sense of worth, because worth that is based on what you provide is unstable. It depends on your output, your usefulness, your ability to continue giving, and the moment you slow down, you begin to feel anxious. Because if you are not giving, you are not proving, and if you are not proving, you fear losing. So you continue, even when it drains you, even when it feels imbalanced, even when something inside you knows it is not sustainable. You convince yourself this is who you are, caring, understanding, low maintenance. But beneath that identity, something else is growing. Resentment, not always directed at others, but at yourself. A quiet frustration that builds over time. Why am I always the one giving more? Why do I keep ending up in one-sided relationships? Why do I feel exhausted in something that is supposed to feel good? This resentment is not random. It is a signal that something is out of alignment. Because overgiving is not true generosity. It is self-rejection. Each time you give beyond your capacity to secure connection, you send a message inward. My presence alone is not enough. That belief keeps you trapped. Because as long as you believe you must add value to be valued, you will continue to overextend yourself. You will continue to give in ways that drain you. You will continue to seek worth through effort instead of recognizing it as inherent. Healing this pattern does not mean you stop giving. It means you change why you give. You shift from automatic giving to intentional giving. Intentional giving begins with a simple question. Do I want to give this, or am I afraid not to? This question reveals everything. Because if your giving is driven by fear, it will drain you. If it is driven by choice, it will sustain you. Fear-based giving feels urgent. It feels necessary. It feels like something you must do to maintain connection. Choice-based giving feels calm. It feels aligned. It feels like an expression of who you are, not a strategy to be accepted. Learning to give less will feel uncomfortable at first. Your body will resist. Your mind will create stories. It will tell you that people will leave, that you will lose connection, that you are becoming selfish. Let those thoughts come, because what is actually happening is not loss. It is exposure. You are no longer covering the imbalance. You are allowing it to be seen. And when that happens, something important becomes clear. Some people will step forward. They will give. They will meet you halfway. They will show interest, effort, presence. Others will not. They will pull back. They will lose interest. They will fade. This is not rejection. It is clarity. You begin to see who values you and who values what you provide. This distinction is essential because one leads to real connection. The other leads to exhaustion. When you stop overgiving, your presence changes. It gains weight. Your time becomes valuable. Your energy becomes intentional. Your yes becomes meaningful. And your no becomes respected. You are no longer performing for love. You are participating in it. And something shifts internally as well. You begin to feel less drained, less resentful, less anxious, because you are no longer constantly extending yourself beyond your capacity. You are operating from balance. You allow yourself to receive. You allow yourself to need. You allow yourself to be supported. And this creates a different kind of connection, one that is mutual, one that is sustainable, one that does not require you to sacrifice yourself to maintain it. Overgiving was never the proof of your worth. It was the result of forgetting it. And when you remember that your presence alone is enough, your behavior changes naturally. You no longer need to prove. You no longer need to overextend. You no longer need to earn. You simply choose. And from that place, love becomes lighter, cleaner, more real. Chapter 10. How to give with intention instead of fear. There comes a point where you begin to see your own patterns clearly. You notice how often you say yes when you mean no. How quickly you offer your time, your attention, your energy, before even checking in with yourself. You start to recognize that your giving has not always come from fullness, but from pressure. From the quiet fear that if you do not show up in a certain way, something will be lost. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The question then becomes simple, but not easy. Why am I giving right now? Not what you are giving, not how much, but why? Because the same action can come from two completely different places. One is rooted in fear. The other is rooted in choice. Fear-based giving feels urgent. It feels like something you have to do. It carries a subtle tension, a sense that if you do not act, something might shift, something might break, someone might leave. You give to prevent loss. You give to secure stability. You give to maintain connection. And even if the other person receives it positively, something inside you remains unsettled. Because the giving was not free. It was conditional. Not in the sense that you expect something in return consciously, but in the sense that your internal state depends on the outcome. If they respond well, you feel relief. If they do not, you feel doubt. That is not generosity. That is negotiation. Choice-based giving feels entirely different. It is slower, calmer. There is no urgency behind it. You give because you want to, not because you feel you must. And because it is chosen, it does not carry the same emotional weight. It does not create expectation. It does not bind your worth to the response. You can give freely, and you can also not give, without guilt. This is where balance begins. But to reach this point, you must first create space between impulse and action. You must learn to pause. When the urge to give arises, instead of acting immediately, you stop. You check in. You ask yourself, do I genuinely want to do this? Or am I afraid of what will happen if I don't? This moment of awareness is critical, because without it, you will continue operating from habit, from conditioning, from patterns that were built long before you understood them. At first, this pause will feel uncomfortable. Your system is used to acting quickly. It is used to responding immediately, to filling gaps, to smoothing tension. So when you interrupt that pattern, resistance appears. You may feel anxious. You may feel guilty. You may feel like you are doing something wrong. But you are not. You are simply choosing differently. And that choice begins to shift everything. Because when you stop giving automatically, you allow reality to reveal itself. You allow space to exist. And in that space, people show you who they are. Some will step forward. They will initiate. They will contribute. They will meet you with effort and presence. They will not rely on you to carry the connection alone. Others will not. They will remain passive. They will wait. They will expect you to fill the space as you always have. And when you do not, the dynamic changes. This is where clarity emerges, not through confrontation, but through absence, through the simple act of not overextending yourself. And this clarity is valuable, because it shows you which connections are mutual and which are one-sided. It allows you to see where energy flows both ways and where it only flows from you. This is not about testing people. It is about revealing truth. When you give with intention, you are no longer trying to control outcomes. You are observing them. You are no longer investing blindly. You are investing consciously. And that changes your experience completely. You stop feeling drained. You stop feeling unappreciated. You stop questioning why things feel imbalanced. Because you are no longer contributing to the imbalance. You are allowing balance to form naturally. There is also something deeper happening. When you give less, but with intention, your presence becomes more defined. Your energy becomes more contained. Your time becomes more valuable. Not because you are withholding, but because you are no longer scattering yourself. And people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who is always available and someone who is intentionally present. One feels predictable. The other feels meaningful. When your presence is intentional, it carries weight. It is not taken for granted. It is recognized, respected, valued. This does not mean everyone will respond positively. Some people are accustomed to your overgiving. They benefited from it. They may feel confused or even frustrated when you change. Let them. Because your responsibility is not to maintain their comfort. It is to maintain your alignment. And alignment requires honesty. Honesty about your limits. Honesty about your energy. Honesty about what you can give without compromising yourself. When you begin to operate from this place, something shifts inside you. You feel lighter, less pressured, less responsible for managing everything. You begin to experience rest without guilt, distance without anxiety, silence without urgency, because you know that your value is not tied to how much you give. It is inherent. And from that understanding, your relationships evolve. You no longer participate in connections that require constant effort to sustain. You no longer overinvest in people who underinvest in you. You no longer give to prove your worth. You give because it feels right, and you stop when it does not. This is balance. Not forced, not negotiated, but natural. And in this balance, something becomes possible that was not possible before. Mutuality. A connection where both people show up, where both people give, where both people are present, without one carrying the weight of the other. This is what real giving supports. Not exhaustion, not imbalance, but connection that is sustainable. And from that place, love becomes something you share, not something you try to secure. Chapter 11. Boundaries are the highest form of self-love for many people. The word boundaries feels uncomfortable. It sounds harsh, distant, almost like rejection. It carries the weight of conflict, of tension, of saying something that might disrupt the connection. So instead of setting boundaries, most people avoid them. They tolerate, they adjust, they explain, they endure, and over time, they convince themselves that this is what love requires. But this is not love. This is self-erasure. Boundaries are not walls. They are definitions. They define where you end and where another person begins. They clarify what you are available for and what you are not. They protect your inner world so that connection can exist without consuming you. Without boundaries, you do not have connection. You have absorption. You absorb other people's emotions. You absorb expectations. You absorb pressure, tension, responsibility that was never yours to carry. And slowly, your own clarity begins to blur. You start to lose track of what you feel, what you need, what you want, because you are constantly adjusting to everything outside of you. This constant adjustment may look generous, but it is unsustainable. Your energy begins to leak, your patience begins to thin, your resentment begins to grow, and eventually, something inside you begins to resist. Not because you are becoming difficult, but because you are becoming aware. Boundaries restore structure. They bring you back into alignment with yourself. They allow you to remain present, in connection, without losing your center. They give your nervous system something stable to rely on. Because when you know your limits and you honor them, you no longer have to constantly monitor yourself. You no longer have to guess what is acceptable. You no longer have to stretch beyond your capacity to maintain peace. You simply stand in what is true for you. And that creates a different kind of presence, one that is clear, grounded, unambiguous. One of the most common fears around boundaries is this: if I set them, people will leave. And sometimes that is true. But what you must understand is why. People who value you will not leave because you have boundaries. They will adjust. They may not always agree. They may not always understand immediately. But they will respect your limits because they respect you. People who resist your boundaries are not reacting to the boundary itself. They are reacting to the loss of access they once had. Access to your time, your energy, your availability, your silence. And when that access changes, the dynamic changes. This resistance is not a sign that you are wrong. It is information. It shows you who was connected to you and who was connected to what you provided. This distinction matters because one leads to real connection, the other leads to dependency. Setting boundaries also brings up something many people struggle with deeply: guilt. You may feel like you are being selfish, like you are disappointing others, like you are doing something wrong. But this guilt is not a signal of harm. It is a signal of change. It is the feeling that arises when you step outside of a role you have been playing for a long time. The role of being always available, always understanding, always accommodating. When you begin to step out of that role, your system reacts. It is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar often feels uncomfortable. But discomfort does not mean you are wrong. It means you are growing. Boundaries do not require long explanations. They do not require justification. They do not require permission. They require clarity. Simple, direct language is enough. This doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. I need time. These statements are not aggressive. They are honest, and honesty is the foundation of real connection. When you express a boundary calmly, without defensiveness or apology, you create something powerful. You anchor yourself. You communicate self-respect without hostility. You make your internal world visible, and that visibility allows others to respond truthfully. Some will meet you there, some will not. And both outcomes serve you. Because boundaries do not push people away. They filter. They remove what drains you. They preserve what nourishes you. They make space for relationships that are based on mutual respect instead of silent compromise. There is also another important function of boundaries. They protect you from resentment. Resentment builds when you say yes, but mean no. When you give, but feel forced. When you stay silent, but feel violated. Each of these moments creates internal tension, a gap between what you do and what you feel. And over time, that gap becomes heavy. Boundaries close that gap. They align your actions with your truth. They allow you to act in a way that reflects how you actually feel. And this alignment reduces internal conflict. You feel lighter, more stable, more at peace, because you are no longer living in contradiction with yourself. Boundaries also deepen connection. When you are not constantly guarding yourself, when you are not suppressing your truth, when you are not overextending, you can actually be present, fully, without tension, without hesitation, without fear of being overwhelmed. This creates intimacy, not the kind based on intensity or constant interaction, but the kind based on honesty, on mutual understanding, on clarity. Many people fear that boundaries will isolate them, but the opposite is true. Boundaries do not isolate, they refine. They remove what is misaligned, and they strengthen what is real. You may lose certain dynamics, certain patterns, certain people, but what remains will be more stable, more balanced, more true, because you are no longer being loved for your compliance. You are being valued for your presence. And there is a difference. When you are valued for your compliance, you must maintain it to keep connection. When you are valued for your presence, you can simply be. That is freedom. And that freedom begins the moment you decide that your inner world is worth protecting, that your limits matter, that your energy is not endlessly available, that your peace is not negotiable. Boundaries are not something you use occasionally. They are a way of living, a way of relating, a way of honoring yourself in every interaction. And when you begin to live this way, something shifts. You stop fearing conflict. You stop fearing rejection. You stop fearing disapproval. Because you trust yourself. You trust that you will not abandon yourself to keep something that costs too much. And that trust becomes your foundation. From that foundation, love becomes possible in a new way. Not as something you endure, but as something you participate in, without losing who you are. Chapter 12. Why guilt appears the moment you choose yourself. Guilt is one of the most powerful forces that keeps people trapped in patterns they have already outgrown. It does not shout, it whispers. It tells you that choosing yourself is selfish, that prioritizing your needs is inconsiderate, that saying no makes you difficult, that taking space means you are ungrateful, cold, or uncaring. And because guilt feels uncomfortable, many people retreat the moment it appears. They start to change, to set boundaries, to give less, to speak more honestly, and then guilt rises. It creates tension in the body, doubt in the mind, a sense that something is wrong. So they step back. They soften their boundaries. They explain more than necessary. They return to old behaviors, not because those behaviors feel right, but because they feel familiar. Because familiarity feels safer than growth. But here is what most people do not realize. Guilt is not a reliable indicator of truth. It is a conditioned response. It is the emotional echo of rules you learned long ago, rules that were never consciously chosen, but quietly absorbed. Rules like, keep the peace, don't disappoint others, be easy to deal with, put others first. These rules may have helped you once. They may have made you more accepted, more liked, more connected, but they also came with a cost. They taught you to measure your worth by how little space you take. So when you begin to take up space, when you begin to include yourself in your own life, your system reacts. It feels like a violation, not because it is wrong, but because it is new. Guilt often appears at the exact moment you begin to break a pattern. The moment you stop overgiving. The moment you say no without explanation. The moment you choose rest instead of obligation. The moment you decide not to adjust yourself to make someone else comfortable. In those moments, your nervous system does not recognize growth. It recognizes deviation, and deviation feels unsafe. So guilt arises as a way to pull you back into what is known, back into what is predictable, back into what kept you accepted, but accepted at what cost? That is the question you must begin to ask, because every time you override your own needs to avoid guilt, you reinforce the very pattern you are trying to break. You teach yourself that your comfort is secondary, that your boundaries are negotiable, that your truth can be adjusted to maintain approval, and over time, this erodes your sense of self. Guilt also thrives on misinterpretation. It convinces you that if someone feels disappointed, you have done something wrong. If someone reacts negatively, you must correct it. If someone struggles with your boundary, you should remove it. But other people's emotional responses are not proof of your wrongdoing. They are responses to change. When you change, others must adjust, and not everyone adjusts easily. Some will resist. Some will misunderstand. Some will project their own expectations onto you. But none of that defines your alignment, because alignment is internal. It is not determined by how others feel about your choices. It is determined by whether your choices reflect your truth. Choosing yourself does not mean disregarding others. It means including yourself. It means recognizing that your needs are not obstacles to connection. They are part of it. For a long time, you may have been the person who removed yourself from the equation to make things work. The one who adjusted, the one who accommodated, the one who made sure everything was okay, even when you were not. Choosing yourself is the act of restoring balance. It is not about taking more. It is about no longer giving everything away. This shift can feel subtle. You decline an invitation without over-explaining. You take time before responding, instead of reacting immediately. You leave a conversation when you feel drained. You allow yourself to rest, without justifying it. These actions may seem small, but they represent something significant. They represent a shift in identity, from someone who exists for others, to someone who includes themselves, and that shift challenges the old version of you. The version that was always available, always understanding, always accommodating. That version kept you connected, but it also kept you limited. Let it dissolve, not with force, but with awareness, because you are not losing yourself. You are finding yourself. Guilt will still appear. That is part of the process. But the difference now is that you do not obey it. You observe it. You question it. You ask, what rule am I breaking right now? And often, the rule is outdated. A rule that no longer serves who you are becoming. A rule that was never meant to define your entire life. And once you see that, Guilt begins to lose its authority. It becomes just a feeling, not a command. You can feel it without acting on it. You can acknowledge it without changing your decision. And each time you do that, something strengthens inside you. Self-respect. Self-respect does not shout. It does not demand. It does not seek approval. It simply stands. Quietly, steadily. It holds your choices. It supports your boundaries. It reinforces your alignment. And the more you choose yourself, even in the presence of guilt, the stronger that self-respect becomes. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to rely on your own judgment. You begin to move through the world with more clarity. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you are no longer negotiating your worth. Choosing yourself does not make you unlovable. It makes your love real. Because love that comes from obligation is heavy. Love that comes from choice is free. And when you begin to live from that place, your relationships change. Some will deepen, some will fall away. And both outcomes are necessary, because you are no longer building connection on self-sacrifice. You are building it on truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, always leads you closer to what is real. Chapter 13. Choosing yourself without apology. There is a moment in your life when something shifts quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. You begin to realize that constantly explaining yourself is exhausting, that shrinking your needs to make others comfortable is draining, that living in a way that requires you to be less than what you feel is slowly disconnecting you from your own life. And in that realization, a new question emerges. What would it look like to choose myself fully? Not partially, not when it is convenient, not when it does not affect others, but fully. For most people, this question is immediately followed by resistance, because choosing yourself has been misunderstood for a long time. It has been labeled as selfish, as inconsiderate, as something that hurts others. So even when you begin to understand that you need to change, a part of you hesitates. You begin to think, what if people leave? What if they don't understand? What if I lose connection? And beneath all of those questions is one deeper fear. What if I am no longer accepted? So instead of choosing yourself completely, you choose yourself carefully. You set boundaries, but you soften them. You speak your truth, but you adjust it. You take space, but you explain it. You begin to change, but you do it in a way that still tries to maintain approval. This is not wrong. It is part of the transition, but it is not the final step. Because true self-alignment does not come with constant explanation. It comes with clarity. Choosing yourself without apology does not mean you become dismissive or indifferent. It does not mean you ignore the impact of your actions on others. It means you stop justifying your existence. You stop feeling the need to make your decisions acceptable to everyone around you. You stop negotiating your truth in order to be understood. You stop seeking permission to live in alignment with yourself. Because the truth is this: you will not be understood by everyone, and that is not a problem. It is reality. For a long time, you may have built your identity around being liked, around being easy to be around being someone who creates comfort for others. And while that may have brought you connection, it also came at a cost. It required you to filter yourself, to adjust constantly, to prioritize how others feel over what is true for you. Choosing yourself means letting go of that identity, not abruptly, but intentionally. You begin to make decisions based on alignment, not approval. You say no when something does not feel right, without needing to explain every detail. You take time for yourself without feeling obligated to justify it. You speak honestly, even when your voice feels unfamiliar. You allow yourself to be misunderstood. And that last part is one of the most difficult, because being misunderstood can feel like rejection. But it is not. It is simply the result of not fitting into expectations that no longer match who you are. When you stop explaining yourself excessively, something interesting happens. The people who truly understand you will stay. They will not require constant justification. They will not need you to shrink your truth. They will meet you where you are. And the people who only connected with the version of you that was always accommodating may begin to drift. Not because you changed into something wrong, but because you changed into something real. This is not loss. It is refinement. You are no longer holding on to connections that require you to be less than you are. You are allowing space for connections that support your growth. Choosing yourself also means accepting the cost of that choice. Not everyone will come with you. Not every relationship will survive your growth. Not every dynamic will adapt. And that can feel uncomfortable. But what you must understand is this: you are not losing people. You are losing roles. Roles that required your silence. Roles that depended on your overgiving. Roles that were built on your willingness to abandon yourself. And when those roles dissolve, something stronger takes their place. Self-respect. Self-respect does not come from being liked. It comes from being aligned. It comes from knowing that your actions reflect your truth, that your decisions are not driven by fear, that your life is not organized around avoiding discomfort, but around honoring what matters. And this changes how you experience yourself. You begin to feel more stable, more grounded, less reactive. You move differently, not rushed, not pressured, but intentional. You stop overthinking every decision. You stop second-guessing your instincts. You trust yourself. And that trust becomes visible in the way you speak, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you make decisions. You no longer ask, "Is this okay?" You ask, "Is this true for me?" And that question becomes your guide. There will still be moments of doubt, moments where old patterns try to return, moments where you feel the urge to explain, to adjust, to seek approval. But now, you notice it. And instead of following it automatically, you pause. You choose again. You remind yourself, "I do not need permission to be aligned with myself." And each time you do this, the pattern weakens. The need for approval fades. The urge to explain softens. And what remains is clarity. A clear sense of who you are, what you value, what you will and will not accept. This clarity simplifies everything. You no longer spend energy trying to maintain dynamics that do not align. You no longer invest in connections that require constant adjustment. You no longer stay in situations that feel wrong just to avoid discomfort. You choose calmly, clearly, without apology. And from that place, your relationships change, not because you are trying to control them, but because you are no longer participating in what is not true. You attract different energy, different dynamics, different people. People who do not need you to be less. People who value your presence as it is, not as you modify it to be. And this is where real connection begins. Not in performance, not in adjustment, but in authenticity. Because when you choose yourself without apology, you are no longer asking to be accepted. You are simply being, and that is enough. Conclusion. There is a quiet clarity that comes when you finally see the pattern, not with judgment, but with understanding. You begin to recognize that you were never weak for seeking love. You were simply repeating what you had learned, trying to feel safe, trying to feel chosen, trying to feel enough. And in that process, you gave more than you should have, stayed longer than you needed to, and abandoned yourself in ways that felt necessary at the time. But now, you see it, and that changes everything. Because once you see that begging was never love, only fear, you are no longer bound to it. You begin to return to yourself, not all at once, but steadily, through your boundaries, through your choices, through your willingness to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop chasing what does not choose you. You stop asking for permission to exist as you are. And in that return, something stabilizes inside you. You are no longer searching for someone to complete you. You are standing as someone who is already whole. And from that place, love becomes something entirely different. Not something you beg for, but something you allow.